There's a slight change in plan this week from where we were supposed to be. Today, according to the Bible Year Study, we were going to talk about Psalm 100, and we were going to talk about praise and thanksgiving. But if I'm being 1,000% honest with you, I can't do it today. In his book, God and the Pandemic, N.T. Wright writes this about the Psalms. Roughly 1/3 of the Psalms are lamenting that things are not as they should be. The words they use are words of complaint, of question, sorrow, anger, and frustration, and often enough, bitterness. They are all part of the prayer book of Jesus himself, and the New Testament draws freely on them to express not only our own laments, but the way of Jesus too. So today I'd like to read for you a lament psalm. Hear these words of Psalm 88. Lord, God of my salvation, by day I cry out, even at night before you, let my prayer reach you. Turn your ear to my outcry. Because my whole being is filled with distress, my life is at the very brink of hell. I'm considered as one of those plummeting into the pit. I am like those who are beyond help, drifting among the dead, lying in the grave like dead bodies, those who don't remember anymore, those who are cut off from your power. You place me down in the deepest pit, in places dark and deep. Your anger smothers me. You subdue me with it, wave after wave. You've made my friends distant. You've made me disgusting to them. I can't escape. I'm trapped. My eyes are tired of looking at my suffering. I've been calling out to you every day, Lord. I've had my hands outstretched to you. Do you work wonders for the dead? Do ghosts rise up and give you thanks? Is your faithful love proclaimed in the grave, your faithfulness in the underworld? Are your wonders known in the land of darkness, your righteousness in the land of oblivion? But I cry out to you, Lord. My prayer meets you first thing in the morning. Why do you reject my very being, Lord? Why do you hide your face from me? Since I was young, I've been afflicted, I've been dying, I've endured your terrors, I'm lifeless. Your fiery anger has overwhelmed me, your terrors have destroyed me. They surround me all day long like water, they engulf me completely. You've made my loved ones and companions distant. My only friend is darkness. Here ends the reading. Spirit of God, stir up your people.
Thanks be to God.
I'm guessing you came to worship today with expectations. Expectations on what I might talk about, what I might not talk about, what you're hoping I'm talking about, what you're hoping I'll avoid. And I'm going to go ahead and just tell you now that if you came with expectations, I'm guessing most of you will be disappointed in me. Because you see, I can't talk about praise and thanksgiving this week. It's been a hard couple months in our country. It's been a hard couple years in our country, and I just can't do it. I can't talk about praise and thanksgiving on this day. And I picked this psalm not because I agree with the theology, but because it's the theology I hear when I look out in the world. Why, God, are you allowing this to happen? Why did you do this to us? Now, let me tell you, you might also be disappointed in me because I know that in the face of tragedy, in the face of the recent tragedies like we've experienced, I know that my call and my focus is not to talk about the mechanics of how recent tragedies went down. I'm not here to talk to you today about policy or politics. I want to talk to you instead about the mindset behind such events and the things that I see in the world and how I understand them from a spiritual perspective. It is my sincerely held belief that talking this way is not a cop-out. That the conversation I want us to have and be having, the issues that I want us to address are much harder than talking about the mechanics and the symptoms of the problem. I'm not saying those shouldn't be addressed. By all means, have your conversations. Talk about gun control if you want to. Talk about access to mental health care. Advocate for the things that you believe in. Let's talk about the radicalization of youth that happens on the internet. Let's talk about police reform and police response. Let's talk about healthcare reform. All of those things that you might believe is broken in this world, talk about it. Let's do something about it. But that's not my role up here on Sunday morning. My role up here is to be a spiritual guide and to try and get at what God intends for the world, and it goes beyond policy and politics. When I was in West Branch, I gave a sermon about objectification, and I've given the sermon here too, or something like it, because it's my, again, sincerely held belief that objectification isn't just a sexual thing. It's something that we do to people all the time. And after my sermon, the Sunday school class met, and all this Sunday school class did was talk about the sermon, right? That was their whole purpose. And so I would go sometimes, and sometimes I wouldn't go because I couldn't handle what it was between services, right? I had to turn around and preach again. I wasn't ready for feedback that fast. But I remember I went after this sermon. And there was a man I respected a lot in the room, and he was talking about his training as he headed off to Vietnam. And the thing that he said was, in his training, they were taught to use distancing words about the enemy. They were taught to use what we would call racist slurs about the enemy that they were facing. And you know what? I understood why they were taught that. Because it's my belief that most people are incapable of shooting another person. Most of us are incapable of murdering another human. Would you agree with that? Now, I know, I'm sure some of you in a fit of anger have had the thought cross your mind, oh, I could just kill them. But really, that's mostly just like a saying, isn't it? None of us actually consider that a real threat. Most of us are incapable of killing other human beings, and so this distancing language helps young men and young women go to war, right? But this distancing language is a symptom of the problem. The problem, as I see it, is that we all look at other people not as people, but as an enemy, or as an object, or as an obstacle to overcome. And that is the whole issue in a nutshell, in my belief. Every other sign and symptom that we want to talk about starts as viewing people not as people, but as an enemy, as an object, or as an obstacle to overcome. The world is full of this. It leads to all kinds of violence because we're no longer looking at sacred individuals. We can do violence to them and to their bodies. When we're looking at an enemy, we're looking at someone that must be destroyed before they destroy me and my family. It's self-defense. It's stand your ground. When we're looking at an obstacle, we're no longer even looking at a someone. We're looking at a something that's keeping me from the pursuit of happiness that I deserve. They are in my way. It's their fault that my life is not as good as it should be. And when we're looking at an object, again, we're not looking at someone, we're looking at something. Something that can be used and disposed of for my own happiness and my own flourishing. People who help me make money, and how do I use them to increase my profit margin? Or don't even get me started on the groups in social media that talk about other human beings as the reason they're not. There's kids in the room. I can't get as graphic as I could, but they exist. There are people out there that blame other groups of people and say, well, I should be able to do whatever I want to them because it's not my fault they say no to me. When we stop seeing people created in the image of God, When we stop seeing the sacred, when we start seeing enemies and obstacles and objects, it becomes easier and easier and easier to commit violence. The reason this conversation is harder, in my opinion, by the way, is because it involves all of us. When we talk about violent people committing crime, it's easy to distance ourselves from the violence. Heck, if you are pro-gun control, it's easy to distance yourself from the conversation because you may not be a gun owner. So you're not them, right? And the people who don't want me to talk about gun control, who don't want any of us to talk about gun control, no matter how nuanced the conversation may be, they've distanced themselves because they're like, you don't understand the culture. You're not a gun control. You're not a gun owner. You have no idea. Honestly, you're both right. Because we've put each other in groups and we've named the other as the problem. We distance ourselves from people based on gender, based on sexual orientation, based on the color of skin, based on the area someone is born, based on the way people choose to spend their money. You name it, we use it to distance ourselves from other people. And the more we distance ourselves from other people, the easier it is to start to blame those other people for the problems we're having. It's how things like anti-Semitism starts, right? The Jews control the money and there's a big financial conspiracy by them, right? Some of you are smirking, but this is a thing that's actually circling back around. After the attacks of 9/11, the Muslim population became a them. And if you looked remotely any other shade besides Casper, we had questions for you, right? The reason this is the harder conversation is because at some point we have all done it. We have all done it and we all do it. If we dig and dig and dig into our thoughts and our feelings and our actions, at some point in time we are all guilty of this othering and this objectifying. But it's not who we're called to be. The radical witness that the Christian church has to offer the world is still the same radical witness that Jesus called us to way back when Jesus was still like doing his earthly thing before his crucifixion and his death and his resurrection. When he said to his early followers, they will know you by your love for one another. That is radical countercultural message right there. If we could get that right as a church, if we could reclaim that unconditional love and acceptance we're always talking about, if we could reclaim that in our everyday interactions, that is world-transforming evangelism just there. We wouldn't have to say or do anything else because the rest of the world is so into this othering and objectifying. From a very practical standpoint, I want us to be a church that avoids, not just avoids, but fights against any words or actions that create distance between us and other people. I want us to be the church where we could sit down and have a hard conversation about guns in America. And be so open to the conversation that none of us have any idea where this is going to end up. Right? Wouldn't that be great? That I don't walk in with the assumption that I'm going to change your mind and you're going to agree with me. But maybe we walk in with the understanding that we're both going to be different when we leave the room today. If only in that we understand each other better. And then extend that out to every political conversation you could ever imagine. And no matter what is said in that room, it'll be said out of love. And no matter how we leave the room, we're going to leave the room still loving each other. Because every time we interact with another human being, we're going to remember that they're a human being. I think this is an appropriate sermon for Memorial Day because I do have veterans in my family. I have a lot of veterans I love. There are veterans who go to this church. There are veterans who gave up everything. And my understanding is that they gave up everything so that we could have these conversations, so that we could create a nation where people are safe, where there's flourishing for all people, where people are free to say the stuff that they need to say. That's my understanding. And so it's my hope and it's my prayer that on this Memorial Day weekend that we would decide we are going to honor the legacy of those human beings that have sacrificed their lives for us and of Jesus Christ who sacrificed his life for us by being a force of love in the world. That's my prayer this morning. And I hope it's your commitment this morning too. Amen.